all to the WIldcatter Exchange. This session is with Mike Price and Todd Camp, Comics from the Gone World. My name is Rachel Pilcher. I'm the Managing Director of WIldcatter Exchange and the owner and founder of Fort Worth Writers Boot Camp. We're very glad to have you here today. So with the introductions, Mike Price.
Whoops. Who that?
Who's that? He's an author, editor, illustrator, journalist, musician, and composer. Michael H. Price is a multidisciplinary artist, bandleader, entrepreneur, currently specializing in creating and self-distributing graphic novels, restoring lost comics of yesteryear, and playing in 3 working bands, the City Light Sceners, Salt Lick, and the Swing Masters with Sumter Bruton. His journalism career includes long stints on staff as writer and editor of Fort Worth Star-Telegram and the Fort Worth Business Press. His long-form compositions often grace the stage at Fort Worth's legendary Hip Pocket Theater. Todd Camp is journalist, actor, cartoonist, and comedian. Born in Corpus Christi, Camp migrated to Fort Worth to study journalism. His professional career began with 2 years at the Denton Record Chronicle as a graphic designer, film critic, and editorial cartoonist. He then spent 18 years at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, where he helped define the paper's groundbreaking section for young people, Class Acts.
Like a lifetime.
I remember Class Acts. And I was in school.
Yeah, one of this year's authors was one of our kids.
Fantastic. And served as multiple roles as a critic, reporter, section editor, copy editor, and humorist. Outside journalism, Camp has written, directed, and starred in 3 feature films, reviewed film for KXAS Channel 5, written and illustrated 3 graphic novels, and 7 long-running comic strips. In 1998, he co-founded Q Cinema, the Fort Worth Gay and Lesbian International Film Festival, for which he served as artistic director for 14 years. In 2010, he co-founded Q Live, a live theater spinoff of Q Cinema. He is a sought-after actor in local theater productions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Well, hey.
So, Comics from the Gone World. So what would y'all like to say?
Where did it go? I stole that phrase, Gone World, from Lawrence Ferlinghetti, one of the original beat poets. A great favorite of mine in college was a collection of Ferlinghetti poems called Pictures of the Gone World. What is that? Well, it's gone, man. That phrase recurred to me back when I started restoring a whole bunch of pre-censorship comic book stories from the early 50s. Comic books changed drastically in 1954 when the Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency decided that they needed to just ban the damn things. You know, let's not worry about content, just knock them dead. So, you know, about all we had left was Popeye and Porky Pig, all due respect. But I, like, gosh, didn't we used to have Tales from the Crypt? Didn't we used to have, you name it. A lot of really irresponsible storytelling going on there, and thus the charm of it. And I snuck those things into my house all the time when I was in 1st and 2nd grades in school, and didn't turn me into a juvenile delinquent, so yeah. Well,
that's a matter of
She does not agree with you.
Of record. Yeah. Of record, yes ma'am. But it did create a kind of a subversive attitude. Anyway, when Todd Camp and I started working together about, gosh, 1986, approximately, 7? The year after I discovered Joe Lansdale through a book called Dead in the West. And don't miss that presentation later on today. It was all kind of falling back together. You know, it's like, what kind of comic, what kind of cartoon? Let's do some horror stories, but let's do them with a sense of humor. And let's not worry about the language. Use the language that expresses you, not the language that you feel is polite and palatable to a large audience. Because if you, what did we say just last session, if you write to please yourself, you're going to please a whole bunch of other people too. and tell the story. Sometimes, as Joe has said in his own words, sometimes there will be rude language. Sometimes there will be situations. Well, hey, pick it up from there, will you?
Well, it's funny because I met Mike as a lifelong horror fan. When I was attending TCU, we had a group of guys that would get together and watch really bad horror movies called the Carnage Committee. And Mike was a film critic at Star Telegram, and I was immediately drawn to him because he was one of the only film critics I'd ever read that didn't think horror movies were stupid. And he treated them with a sense of reverence and, well, just a general respect for the storytelling and for the movies. And this would be, you know, anything from a Friday the 13th to a Nightmare on Elm Street, two very different types of films, but he would still take those films and look at them from a critic perspective as opposed to just immediately crapping on them like most mainstream movie critics did. So we had him come to TCU and speak about films, and that was kind of where our friendship developed and when it became a partnership. And he'd always been a mentor for me as an aspiring young journalist. So going back to the topic of comics from the Gone World, Mike introduced me to so many comics from the Gone World. As a kid who grew up, unfortunately I didn't have access to the EC comics when I was a kid, so that was something Mike kind of turned me on to, and that became a lifelong obsession from that point on, because it was things I'd never seen before. I grew up with like the mainstream comic world's view of horror stories, which was paled by comparison.
Yeah, well, that was post-censorship.
Yeah, what Gaines was doing, but it. You know, I had a little taste of the EC stuff through Mad, and Mad magazine would publish, occasionally they would publish those special editions, and then you'd see the original mini comics when Harvey Kirkman was first creating Mad, and the kind of chaotic anarchy that was those early issues was also a huge inspiration for me as well. So Mike would always kind of, you know, it's like, oh, well, you like that, well, you should try this, or take a look at this, and it was just a constant, you know, mind explosion of new material that he still does to this day. So he's always turning me on to something I'd not ever heard of or seen before.
Come on and try it, you'll like it. You know, I mean, it's like this, these flashing images on the screen, man, it's like, those last let's just not.
Well, you're loud enough anyways.
Let's just don't say we did. These flashing images, my gosh, what 3 seconds on the screen? Well, each of those pages took about a week to draw. These are excerpts from a book we did together called Carnival of Souls, based on the 1962 movie, which was intended to be like an American art film, but ended up playing drive-ins and grindhouses, as so many low-budgeters from off Hollywood studios go. That's probably the first comic from the Gone World. We didn't have the term to play with back then. We had just finished a visit with a very fine artist named Drew Friedman. You've probably seen his work in many slick magazines, including People. He does celebrity portraits. He's working on a suite of paintings and books now called Old Jewish Comedians. And his portraits are so unnervingly true to life that, like, is that a photograph? No. Well, it feels like a photograph. It doesn't look like a really, but photorealism in art. Drew had just shown us a piece he was working on in that style. It's called pointillism. A lot of dots, millions of dots, each laid in by hand. We're coming home from the meeting. Todd says, well, let's do Carnival like that. And I said, are you sure you know what you're getting into? And he said, let's do it anyway. You know, it's like that great Dagwood Bumstead cartoon where Dagwood and his child are out raking leaves, and the child says, let's take this big pile of leaves into the house and throw them all over the place. And Dagwood gets tearful and sentimental. Oh no, the home is the soul of our family, baby. We can't do that. It would be a sign of disrespect for our home, and it would create impossible amounts of work for us to do. Kid says, let's do it anyway. So, you know, I mean, we're still cleaning up those strewn leaves from all that project, and like, you suffered the most, I'll say.
Yeah. Yeah, I would go back and, I mean, because how many pages is this thing? 50?
It was originally 50. We
Yeah, 50
boosted it up,
pages.
the new edition boosted up to about 60 pages.
So, I mean, Mike came to me, I'd never heard of Carnival of Souls, the movie, I'd never seen it. So I watched the movie and I was immediately taken with it and what they were trying to do. And, I mean, it felt like a lost Twilight Zone episode in feature-length form. But deciding to do that, I had no idea that, you know, as we got close, as the deadline loomed, I was working constantly, and I would have to soak my hands in ice and then soak them and put them in hot water and just go back to the dots. But yeah, it was one of those. I was very happy that it was finished. I think we did one other 2-page story later down the road, 2 or 3 pages
In that style.
and then I was like, I'm done. No, I learned that's when I was really starting to pick up on guys like Jack Davis, who was one of the great old Mad Magazine guys and one of the Tales from the Crypt heroes, and learning the heavy brushwork and the blacks and lots of stuff like that I really became enamored with a brush once I became, I lost my fear of that particular tool. But,
oh dear. You're not supposed to get amused by your own gags, but that's okay. We are just beginning a new book called Stitches, which will be partially a reprint of a 32-page comic book we did 20 years ago called Stitches, or Tales
too ticklish to tell.
Not Tales Too Ticklish to Tell. Tales genetically engineered to keep you in stitches. Take off on Mad, of course. You know, that influence will never go away, and all the better for it. But the centerpiece of the book will be a story that we began 22 years ago, parodying a Steven Spielberg movie. We never did finish the darn thing because we got distracted by other things. The story is called Up Jurassic Park. And that will be finished and become the centerpiece of the new Stitches, which is like going to expand from a 32-page funny book to like a 150 or 200-page anthology.
Just in time for Jurassic World.
Just in time for Jurassic World.
Everything old is new again.
Everything old is new again. About that same time, I did a song I recorded a parody song by the same title, Up Jurassic Park, for the Dr. Demento show out in Los Angeles. We may have to figure out how to resurrect that thing while we're at it. The momentum did kind of stop for a few years there. We got distracted by other projects, but once you acknowledge that the temptation to insult people's intelligence and give them at once a hellacious scare and a good rib-tickling chuckle. We can do that? Well, let's do it. Let's just do it. Let's just not stop doing it. And once you regain that momentum, it's like, what happened? Where did it? We got distracted. We're not distracted now except by the laugh-making, horrifying imperative. Horror and humor are the conjoined birthright of the Southern storyteller. You cannot separate one from the other without diminishing both. You flip a coin, one side says horror, one side says humor. It lands on its edge as often as not. And spin it, well, it's all blurred. Yes, exactly. Frank Stack, a friend of ours, Frank was one of the first underground cartoonists. He's an Austin boy, comes from, he was editing the Texas Ranger, that forbidden humor magazine at University of Texas when I was like in the 4th grade. Frank's now a distinguished professor emeritus of fine art at the University of Missouri, but he's still a rambunctious underground cartoonist. We did a story together not too long ago called Rude Awakening about, it's the same story Robert Bloch told, and he called it A Case of the Stubborn.
Oh, yeah.
About old old grandpa croaks, but he won't lie down and stay dead, and he keeps embarrassing his family by showing up at dinner time. And so Frank and I did this variation on the old folk tale that Robert Bloch also had used, called it Rude Awakening. Here's the wake for the poor bereaved widowed woman, much younger than her old bad husband. All of a sudden, somebody crashes the wake. What's all these people doing in my house? Well, you're supposed to be dead. What? Well, we just buried you. Never mind. Frank gets the script, calls me up. This is before email. Says, is this supposed to be scary or funny? And the answer was, yes. Frank says, okay. And then that story has just been reprinted in a new collection of stories by Frank Stack. And it's as scary and funny as we had intended it to be in 1998. So, more power to us. If you get away with inflicting your questionable off-center sense of humor and shock value on a number of people, that becomes addictive. You want to do it again.
Well, I'll talk about niche publishing, the panel we just had before this. One of the great things about the publishing world now is that there are so many people out there who grew up with, like Mike, who grew up with all of these particular influences and comics and literature and books, all kinds of different things. And people, the publishing world is finally kind of embracing this kind of archival tradition now, where we're seeing stuff that hasn't seen the light of day in more than 20, 30 years, some of it, being collected and bound in these beautiful, gorgeous volumes where you can really kind of see the work. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they're working from original source material as opposed to, photocopies or reprints of what looks like it ran through a fax machine on some editions I've seen of like Winsor McCay stuff. But that's the kind of stuff that really jazzed me when I was really developing as an artist, because Mike turned me on to people like Winsor McCay. I don't know how many people know Winsor McCay, but he was
Little Nemo.
Yeah, turn of the century comic newspaper cartoonist, and probably, I think, easily the most prolific cartoonist of this or any age.
He and Opera and a lot of McKay's stuff was political. A lot of it was like you're having somebody else's dream.
Yeah. You're
not so much conscious of reading McKay as you are of, I'm going to wake up any second now. And then you realize, well, this is somebody else's dream that I'm having. It's rare that an artist can do that. It's rare that an author can drag you into that kind of thing.
Well, and for me, he was a huge influence. I had a short-lived full panel strip that I did for one of the tabloids that was called Dewey's Daydreams, which was a direct ripoff, or as we in the business call it, an homage to McKay. And but people are constantly reprinting his stuff, and there's things that I still haven't seen. I came across a pretty good collection of his dope cartoons where he was making commentary about the dope trade, and he did like 50, 60 beautifully drawn editorial cartoons about the dope peddling business, that many of which I've never seen. And Fantagraphics and some of the bigger comics houses have collected Nemo, which has pretty much been preserved, I think, out there. But there's always new things turning up, and like Mike said, Mike's working with a lot of stuff that may not have the same cachet as McKay, but it's still interesting in its own right. Of course, Mike's doing new and exciting things with it to kind of give it a little bit of a jump start for this century.
In the official Comics from the Gone World series, we're taking pages from the pre-censorship comics that have long been out of print, long out of any copyright protection, long out of any curatorial preservation, restoring the art and then going back and reading them to see what we can do with that really awful, bad, terribly no good dialogue. One of the stories that we just recently restored comes from I think it was called, a magazine called Mysteries, Weird and Strange. Mysteries, Weird and Strange. Okay, that's triple redundancy right there. I like it. A story about a ghastly monster that comes to life made out of uranium, except the uranium has mutated several jungle savages into a giant uranium cannibal monster. And the thing grabs the leading lady and she says, "Eek! What a monster! What a horrible monster!" Like, no more. In the new version, she says, "Buzz off, sluggo." Monster says, "My name's not Sluggo." She says, "It is now, sluggo." Non sequitur. Theater of the absurd. If you've ever sat through a staging of Waiting for Godot, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like, excuse me, this isn't so much highfalutin avant-garde intellectual as it merely is taking Three Stooges vaudeville dialogue and putting it on the legitimate stage and calling it art. Fine line between vaudeville and high art. There are many things. My uncle used to say there's only one show business. He ran movie theaters that catered to all tastes, and if he showed Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments one weekend, then you can pretty well bet your boots he was going to show I Was a Teenage Frankenstein the following weekend. Film is film. Stories is stories. They are what you make of them. Yeah.
Well, and one of the best lessons Mike ever taught me was about being an archivist, and not only of things that may not necessarily ever see the light of day, but also, most importantly, your own work. And if this book is a testament to that. This is probably about 10 years worth of output that Mike and I had together when we were at the Star Telegram, and stuff we did on our own time, stuff we did for the paper as well. And to me, it's like I love going back and looking at this stuff and wincing and like, oh man, wow, that was in print. Okay,
Live with it.
But it's important to see where you came from. And for me, you were talking about influences. I love going back and seeing and remembering what I was reading at the time, or remembering who I was into at that particular period. I go back and say, oh wow, that was my Jack Davis phase, or oh, that's when I was really into this, that, or the other. And it's like, that's the kind of stuff that I enjoy now. Of course, it's also fun to watch a personal style develop. And it's something that, having done that with my own work, it's something that I could do with other people that I read too, whether it's an author or a cartoonist or an artist. It's great to see you begin to learn about their influences, and you can see where, oh, that guy was obviously watching Romero films at that time, and then when they find their own personal voice, it becomes all the more powerful. And you're like, there he is. There's the guy I've been waiting to see.
It's the blue-collar shirt sleeves version of what they have you do in Art Academy. Yeah. You start out imitating the old masters. You get good at it. Some people stop there. I'm going to spend my career imitating the old master. Most who take it seriously use that as their learning curve to create a style of their own. And they may not ever transcend the old masters, but by golly, they develop a style of their own. And that's very much what we've done over the long haul. Todd's gift for mimicry is great in itself, but he's taken it so much farther. Yes, he can duplicate the brushstroke of Jack Davis in 1954. Never an end in itself, always a stepping stone to building that distinctive personal style. Todd just finished the penciling and inking on a story for a new book I'm putting together of stories involving a masked crime fighter known as the Prowler that Tim Truman and I developed. What, 30?
What was the comic company you did that for?
That was Eclipse.
Eclipse.
Eclipse, yes, out in Forestville, California. The Prowler stuff has been out of print for a long time. John Snyder, one of the original artists, and I have been restoring the art, removing all that really ghastly color that Eclipse Comics imposed on it, and turning them into like gray, black and white. It looks like an Orson Welles movie, except with a two-gun vigilante in the middle of it. And we had one story that needed finishing that I'd written, what, in 1987, never got drawn. Gave it to Todd, he cranked it up. I think the kids today would call it meta-fiction. It's like, well, what if the Prowler was at large in the West Indies and he met Eugene O'Neill's The Emperor Jones, and they had a little set to, well, gosh, we could tell that story. So what do we call the story? The Emperor's New Jones. And Todd draws it like, what style is this? It's a personal style that could not have existed without all those influences and all those really diligent attempts to capture the magic of favorite artists. And, yeah, more power to us.
And that story was fun to do because it was completely out of my wheelhouse. I'm much more comfortable drawing putrefying corpses and things that go bump in the night. And this was, you know, kind of a vigilant. I can't draw guns. It's like that was the hardest thing for me to do is to get those 45s right. But it was fun because it's also not only did it have the Jones character from the film, but it also had Bela Lugosi's Chandu the Magician.
Yeah.
So, you know, that kind of stuff was a blast to do. And of course I had a wealth of source material for the Prowler himself, so that was fun to kind of go back and create my own amalgam of the Prowler from Tim's work and Graham Nolan's stuff, so he's kind of a mix of the two that doesn't really look like any of the other ones.
Amazing stuff. Yeah, we're all over the Amazon scene with this new Carnival of Souls book. A lot of how many titles? I think we've got about 10 Gone World titles in print now, and they usually involve these pop art type reconstructions of forgotten stories from the post-war mid-50s years. Unlike the pop art movement, we give credit to the people we're ripping off.
Exactly.
Daryl Roy Lichtenstein created some fun images, but he never told you that he was ripping off Russ Heath or Harry G. Peters or Kirby, definitely Jack Kirby. And it's like, I know where you got that. Why don't you put his name on it at least? I'm working mainly in restoring the art of a fellow named Robert Webb, Bob Webb, Robert Hayward Webb, who was a good to great prolific hack. He drew monster stories, he drew westerns, he drew war stories. He drew Sheena, the Queen of the Jungle, from 1937 up to some point in the 50s, where he just sort of fades away after the censors got their hooks into the business. And from what little I know about Bob Webb, I can almost see him standing out on a street corner holding up a sign that says, "We'll draw for booze money." There's a big influence on Al Feldstein, one of the inventors of the EC Comics style, editor of Tales from the Crypt and its companions. And yet, why didn't Bob Webb get a break like that? Well, who knows? I don't know, but I've got feelers out among the fan community trying to find his descendants. So I'd like to give him something. If these books are going to sell, at the very least give him credit. It just so happens that this event is taking place on gallery night, and we've got a new exhibit of paintings from the Gone World comics down the street at Gallery 440. So if you're in the neighborhood and want to check that out, you can see a little bit more of what we're talking about.
Yeah, a lot of the stuff, if you see the book, you'll see there's a lot of little inscriptions at the bottom of certain stories that say "with apologies to." We're constantly apologizing to people, but that's also a nice tip of the hat to say, yeah, we know that this looks a lot like somebody you might have seen before.
Exactly.
But that's also the joy of it, is because a lot of times most people haven't seen those things before, and a lot of the people that we're kind of tipping our hat to have been forgotten. or part of the gone world, I guess. And there's always that hope that, you know, that's the thing that Mike would constantly turn me on to. I would see something and like it, or like that particular style, and he would say, well, if you like that, then take a look at this, because this is who this guy was coming off of. So it's a constant rabbit hole that I just love going down and further deeper into every time I discover something new. And you know, Davis is one of my favorites, one of my guys, and I love looking at you know, they'll collect his work, and that's a great chance to go back and look at, you know, when he was in the war, to look at his war cartoons and to see, wow, this is Jack Davis before he was Jack Davis.
Yeah.
And so it's like you see the influences that he was, the guys that he was reading and the people that he was influenced by. So it's always fun to do that.
You all ready for questions?
I think we welcome any and all.
All right, if anyone has any questions, now is your time.
Do you both draw, or is it mainly you, Todd?
Primary art. Yeah, we both write, we both draw. Todd's the primary illustrator. We don't really, there's no boss in the studio. It's just somebody get an idea, so how can we best put this together? I generally do the lettering on a story. Todd generally does the pencils and inks, although we've switched off those duties. And we both tell the story. You know, somebody has a good story but no dialogue, probably the other's going to write the dialogue.
Yeah, I did a number of long-running strips that Mike did all my lettering. So he would just, I would give him a script, he would put them in balloons and boxes, and I would go from there.
I've been studying the kind of the how-to of the comic thing, and I have no artistic ability, so, but I know there are several stages of this, the inking and the lettering. and I've written a movie script that many people have told me you need to kind of retrofit this to a comic thing. And where would you go about starting that? I mean, like I said, I've learned the kind of the 101 of it, but actually going and getting an artist and putting it together is the next step.
Always write before you try to start drawing.
Right.
Best to have your dialogue before you start drawing. When you are doing a comic book story, there are two approaches. One, you can just give the blank page to the artist and the plot, and they'll rough out the action. And then you can go in and inflict the words.
The Marvel method.
The Marvel method. Problem I've always had with that damn Marvel method is that it obscures a lot of the art.
Yeah.
Now we work, and we learned this from Harvey Kurtzman in person, who was very generous about teaching it to us. We used the so-called Kurtzman method. He was the creator of Mad Magazine, among many other important pieces of work. Where Harvey got so good at it that he'd just start writing on the illustration board, balloons, borders, finished lettering, maybe some often rough sketches, frequently rough sketches, or he'd take a sheet of tracing paper and rough out the artwork and make a layer, and then give it to the artist. The words are already there. The balloons are already there. No words are going to get over are going to obscure your art. That's our preferred method. I know people who swear by that doggone Marvel method.
Well, Mike's nowhere near as a control freak as Harvey was. I mean, I love one of his greatest works for me was a strip he did for Playboy, a long-running cartoon feature called Little Annie Fanny, which was kind of his take on a sexy version of Candide. And he did, yeah, and he worked with, one of his longtime collaborators, Will Elder, was the other main artist on the strip, but he also had Jack Davis, Arnold Roth, a lot of guys that were big.
Frank Frazetta,
they would come in and work on it. But you look at those original pages, and the collections will show, here's the base with just the balloons and the words, and then it will have 4 overlays, tracing paper overlays, that were themselves works of art. I mean, everything from, he would go down to the color palette that he wanted for those pages.
Yeah.
And then Will, to his, true genius, Will worked with Harvey's kind of control freak persona, because he would create, he never really strayed far from what Harvey gave him, but he would, in order to keep himself from being bored, I guess, he would take every ounce of space that was left over that Harvey didn't draw something and come up with little fun things to fill it. And for me, when I was reading those early Mads, that was what I was just stoked about. Because, I mean, every Will Elder panel took about a good 2 minutes just to make sure you saw everything in it.
All those little extra bits of business were what Will Elder called chicken fat.
But Mike never did that with me. I mean, I would get panels, empty panels, balloons, and we would kind of talk through the action sometimes. But like the Prowler story, I mean, he hadn't looked at that story since the 80s.
Yeah, I wrote it in the 80s, and we didn't take it out and start finishing it until last year.
Yeah.
So,
we sat down and went through it, and I was trying to figure out what's going on in each panel, and we kind of, we discovered there was a whole bit of business that needed to happen in the panel that was not reflected in the dialogue. And I'm like, oh, okay, so I got to figure this out and draw this out. So to me, that's a fun part of it. It's like unlocking a puzzle and trying to make the most of these weird spaces that I have to.
One of the great lessons of those Tales from the Crypt stories is partly by negative example.
Yeah.
The art is invariably good, but very often Al Feldstein would write the exact same thing in the words that would be depicted in the picture. So there was redundancy. One of the things, now we wouldn't have known not to do that if we hadn't, like, that's kind of over obvious, isn't it? How about some words that don't necessarily duplicate the illustrated action? So that's what we've been doing. Where the words in the caption, something that happens a lot in for example, the Jonah Hex stories that Joe Lonsdale and Tim Truman did. That same kind of tense dynamic between the art and the words where both combine rather than grate against one another, trying to say the same thing twice. And we do a lot of that. And honestly, if I hadn't had that example of Feldstein overdoing the words, then I'd probably be overdoing the words myself.
They all did that, though, even the superhero
Even
comic.
the superheroes, yes.
Tim and I write a script like a screenplay almost. I mean, obviously it doesn't move, and then I give him the script. Right. And then I have the panels, how many panels want, and sometimes he'll go back and go, Joe, you got like 9 panels on this page. I don't think that's going to work. So he'll break it down to 6, but mostly it's just, we work perfectly well together.
Right.
I've done this with other too, just do the script almost like a screenplay. The only reason I mention this is because of and it might be helpful to you because it's somewhat different than the Marvel method or the other. And that for somebody that's inclined towards screenplays, which I've done a lot of those, then you might find that methodology workable, depending on your artist too.
Yeah.
And that's we taught a class how to create a graphic novel, and one of our students there he had this very elaborate mythology planned for a book of a collection of like 35 books, but he hadn't actually started anything. So that was one of the things that he had a perfectly envisioned beginning, and so that's what we did with him. Is we sat down and created 2 full pages with balloons and the story, breaking the story into that. And that's something that, as a writer, I mean, if you're not artistically inclined, you can at least figure out, okay, I need this much of the story on the first page, this one here, and
I was thinking about it in terms of the 8th page things when you were making a film.
Where you
kind of divide
You have
it
to
up
know comics, though. I mean, even if you know scripts or it won't help you if you don't understand comics.
Right.
And you have some artists like Tim who can tell a story with his art so well. And Tim, and I have a thing that a lot of people go, well, you didn't do a lot of writing there. They're wrong. I'm telling you what's happening in this panel, but I may not have any dialogue in that panel because I think this is the artist panel. This is for him to show what's going on. But I may have described everything. I probably did. I described everything in that. And I usually use I don't do the Neil Gaiman method of 50 pages to tell you the guy's going to go from here to there. But I do try to be descriptive. And then I believe too that you have to understand negative space. You also have to understand that you can't fill it with words all the time.
Right.
Because sometimes the action tells you what's happening and you're not adding anything.
Well, that's why I'm looking at these images here, thinking it's really less is more. Maybe not quite so much on that page as others, where there's not a lot of words.
Right. Words are important, but they're only important insofar as they work with the pictures. If you got discrete elements, each doing the same thing, you're wasting the reader's time. And time is valuable. You don't want anyone to come away from your book saying, I want my time back. You want them to come away saying, wow, when's the next chapter? And of course, if you've got an epic in mind that would take 8 volumes of 200 pages each, give it up. Write a short story, and then write a sequel, and then write a sequel. And the next thing you know, you've got the collected works, because things add up.
Well, I hate to interrupt such a great discussion. Y'all can continue it over at Amphibian in the lobby area. I believe y'all have some books over there
I believe
as well.
that might be the case.
And if you miss getting books at Amphibian, there are some in the vendor hall over at Landers. Thank you so much for coming.